Nissan Murano valve cover replacement. I'm Brian Eslick from How to Automotive. I'm going to walk you through the steps of replacing them. Okay, to get started, we're going to remove these two covers in the front here by removing the clips and lifting off. You move the two clips on this one and lift off. Next, we're going to use a 5mm Allen and take off the top engine cover. There's going to be 4 bolts that we're going to remove. I'm going to use my Milwaukee M12 cordless ratchet. This thing is amazing. It helps speed things up. Now that the covers are all off, we need to remove this upper intake here, the plenum, to get to the back valve covers. And so we're going to remove everything. But first we're going to get started here in the front by removing the coils. So we're going to squeeze the tabs, pull and unplug, and we're going to do all 3 of them. Once you get them all unplugged, you're going to remove the 10mm bolts. You may have to maneuver the wiring harness kind of out of your way to get to the one in the middle. Just kind of push it to the side and take the bolt out. So once again, I'm going to use my M12 Makita cordless ratchet here to remove all the bolts and make this job go really fast. If you guys haven't seen this, I recommend you check it out. I'll leave a link for it in the description. So once you get all the bolts unbolted, you can go ahead and just pull the coils out and set them aside. We're going to remove the snorkel here by loosening the 2 clamps and then following the vent line down to the valve cover and popping that off and pulling, and then we're just going to lift the whole assembly out. Once it's unbolted, you can set it aside like this. Now we're going to unbolt the throttle body, and there's going to be 4 5mm Allen bolts that we're going to take out. So once you get the 4 bolts out, then what we're going to do is just going to leave everything plugged in and attached to it, and we're just going to swing it over here in this area and just rest it right here. Okay, now that those are off, we're going to unplug the EVAP vent line right here, and then right here is going to be a throttle body hose that we're going to unplug. But what I did was put clamps on it because there's coolant running through these hoses, and then we're also going to take the hose off in the back here in the back, and I'm going to sneak around the back so you guys can see that. If you're having a tough time getting to the clamp on the back hose, we can take the intake off and get to it later. Now after unplugging the hose in the back or deciding if we're going to leave it for later, the next step we're going to do is we need to unbolt the support bracket, and if you look right back here, you can see the 2 bolts for the bracket, and we're going to get to that with a 12mm socket. And what we're going to do is reach around the back of the intake like this, and you can get the ratchet and socket right onto the bolts and go ahead and remove those 2 bolts. Next, we're going to unplug the EVAP purge valve, take the 12mm bolt off, and we're going to set it aside, leaving all the remaining hoses hooked up. Now that the EVAP purge valve is unbolted, the next step is to remove the little bracket that held the valve on. It has a 10mm bolt. We're just going to pull that off and set that aside. So we're going to unbolt the vacuum storage canister, unplug the vacuum switch, and then we're just going to tuck the vacuum canister out of our way like now. Leave everything hooked up, and then we're going to start removing the 12mm bolts holding the intake manifold on, and then we'll lift it up. We'll get access to more hoses and connectors in the back here. One of the bolts is underneath the vacuum switch, so we need to unbolt that. And I leave everything hooked up. I just kind of tuck it out of the way once I get it unbolted, and then you can get the bolt off. Now we can lift the intake manifold off, but in the corner here, the little vent line will probably be snagging, so you have to flex it out of the way and then lift the intake up. Once you get the intake lifted off the studs and pulled back towards you, we can get access to some of the switches and hoses here in the back. So we're going to take off the vacuum line here that goes to the brake booster, and then with the squeeze clamp, and then right behind it is a little electrical connector we're going to unplug. Also right here, the little vacuum lines are held on with this little clip. You can just unpull that out of your way, and that helps give you more room, so just tuck everything out of your way. Okay, once we get this electrical connector unplugged, we need to get the lower portion of it is mounted to the bracket on the back here, and we're going to do that with a flat blade screwdriver, and you'll slide it in between the little bracket and the clip and pry it over. And once you get that little tab pried back, you can pull the clip, the electrical connector, straight off like this. Next, we're going to take the hose that goes to the PCV valve. We're going to pull it off like this. And once you get that pulled off, then the intake is pretty much free, and you can pull it out of the car. And then also maybe one more little wire loom held into the bracket till you pop off. Now that we got the intake manifold off, I like to look down the ports and make sure nothing fell inside, and if anything did, retrieve it out. Then I take shop rags and stuff it down the ports of the intake. That way nothing else falls back inside. Then the next step is to unplug all 3 of the ignition coils. And then once we get them all three unplugged, then we can go ahead and take the bolts, or the 10mm bolts out, and pull the coils straight out. And then there's going to be some little catches on the valve cover here to hold the wire loom down. We use some needle nose pliers and squeeze the little tabs like that and push the electrical connector off. There's going to be a couple of these catches here and here that we're going to remove. So on Nissan valve covers, the tube seals are normally non-serviceable, so that requires you to buy the entire valve cover itself. You can get just the gaskets, but not the tube seals. In this case of this vehicle, the customer did not want to spend the money on replacing the valve covers, just doing the gaskets. So we're gonna do that on this car. So we're just gonna be replacing the valve covers, not the tube seals on this particular job. So I just wanted to point that out so no one yells at me. So we're gonna take this vent line that goes from valve cover to valve cover off. And most likely this vent line is gonna break. It gets really hard and brittle. So you may wanna order this up. I will link it up in the description of the video. As you can see, my hose split when I took it off. So next we're gonna do is pop the wire looms out of their little catches that are mounted to the valve cover. And then we're gonna remove all the 10mm bolts holding the valve cover down. And to make things go really fast, I'm going to use my Makita M12 cordless ratchet here. It's 3/8 drive. This thing is pretty awesome. I will definitely link this up in the description of the video. That way you guys can check this thing out. It's definitely worth having doing jobs like this. One of the bolts is tucked up underneath here. So I'm going to use a 10mm wrench here to crack it free and spin it out. And then once you get this out, then the valve cover will be free and we'll start prying it out. Now with a pry bar or a large screwdriver, you can pry on the edge right here and pop the valve cover up and then start pulling the wiring harness out of your way. And in the back, if you take the wiring harness and flip it over the bracket like this, then it makes a lot more room, and then you can just lift the valve cover straight up and out. Now we're going to start cleaning the cylinder head surface, and we're going to make sure that we don't scrape the dirt into the cylinder head, so we're going to scrape away. And then in the corners there's going to be silicone, so we're going to scrape out the silicone in both corners over here on the front of the cylinder head. And I'm going to use a combination of rags, brake cleans, and scrapers to get all this debris off. Now that that's all cleaned up, we're going to start disconnecting the oxygen sensor wiring here and start lifting the wiring harness up. And then there's going to be some clips on the valve cover that we're going to pop the wiring harness free. Then we'll start removing all of the bolts holding the valve cover down. Now that you have all the bolts out, you can use a pry bar and put it on the edge of the valve cover like you did the back ones and give it a little pry and pop the valve cover up. And now what you're going to do is start lifting the wiring harness up as high as you can, and you can work the valve cover out either to the right or the left. It's your choice, whatever you feel comfortable doing. So I decided to take the valve cover out towards the passenger side of the car, but feel free if anything is in your way to unplug it, like injectors or anything like that. Now with the cover off, we're going to clean up the cylinder head like we did the rear one, being careful not to push the dirt into the cylinder head and clean away from it, and then get all the gunk and stuff, silicone, out of the corners of the cam lobes here. And what I like to use is a little flat blade screwdriver like this, and just use it as lightly scrape the silicone out. You can also use razor blades or scraping tools to get this stuff out. So I'm using factory gaskets, and I will link both of these up in the description, so look for those there if you need to pick these up yourself. So on the valve cover itself, like I was saying before, these tube seals are not serviceable. And if yours are leaking into the spark plug tubes, you'll need to replace the entire valve cover itself. And I will also link that up in the description of the video. In this video, we're not replacing the valve covers. We're just doing the gaskets. For cleaning your valve cover up, you can go ahead and reinstall the new valve cover gaskets into the valve cover itself. Make sure that you press them deep into the grooves of the valve cover. And then what I like to use is a little bit of Permatex Right Stuff. It's a silicone that we use here at the How To Automotive. So we're going to take a small amount of the silicone and put it in the corners of the cam lobes, and then we'll reinstall the valve cover. So when I go to put the valve cover back in, I also like to have a helper hold the wiring harness out of my way. That way nothing gets pinched underneath the gasket as I'm going in. and then just drop it straight down. Then what I do is take a dental mirror and a flashlight and look around all the way around the valve cover, double checking that the valve cover gasket itself didn't fall off or snag on anything as we installed it. And you want to take your time to look at this one. Now we can go ahead and reinstall all the bolts, and we're going to run them down until they're snug. So we're going to torque these bolts down in a pattern, and I printed a diagram out and we're going to follow it. So we're going to torque the first bolt here, the second bolt, the third bolt, fourth bolt, fifth bolt, sixth bolt, seventh, eighth, ninth, and 10th, and we're going to do this in 2 passes. So the first pass we're going to do this is going to be torqued down to 26 foot-pounds here, or 26 inch-pounds, I'm sorry. And then the second pass, we're going to do the exact same torque pattern, but we're going to do it again at 82 inch-pounds. And this diagram is courtesy of ALLDATA. We use them for all of our information at the shop. Now that the valve cover is resecure, we can take the wire loom and plug them back into the valve cover and then install the coils. And then we're going to take the coil harness here and plug it back in. So now we're ready to install the gasket back into the valve cover, and then we're going to use a little bit of the Right Stuff silicone again and put it in the corners of the cam lobe. And now we're going to prep the wiring harness, and if there's any more slack that you need, you can go ahead and unbolt anything, unclip anything that you feel, because it's a tight fit getting this valve cover back in. So, and if you're putting it in and the valve cover snags and falls back off, you can use 3M super weather adhesive and put a thin layer in the track like this, and then reinstall the valve cover gasket, and that'll hold the gasket in place. And like I said, just use a thin layer of this. Now that we got the valve cover back in, we're going to use the dental mirror and check all the way around the perimeter, making sure that the gasket didn't fall off or fall inside the cylinder head. And just take your time to double check. Now that the valve cover is back in, we're going to torque it down, and we're going to use the same spec pattern as we did before. And then here once again are the specifications for the torque. Now that the valve cover is back in and torqued back down, we're going to reinstall the wiring harness, and anything you just unplugged or disconnected in the process to get more access, plug that back in. I unplugged the injectors on this one to get a little bit more height out of the harness. So you're going to start in the front, plug in your O2 sensors, and work your way around. So after you're working your way around plugging everything in, you can plug in the coils in the center here. So after just a quick double check everything's plugged in, next is we're going to take this vent hose that went from valve cover to valve cover and install it. I will link this up in the description of the video with all the part numbers. That way if you guys need to pick this up too, you can get that. Now we're ready to install the intake gasket. I will link this up in the description of the video. That way if you need to pick this up also, you can get that. So now we're just going to remove all of our old rags that we stuffed in the intake, and then we're going to double check in the ports and make sure nothing has fallen into it. Now we're ready to reinstall the intake manifold, but what we're going to do is angle it at an angle, and then start the coolant hose that went to the throttle body first, went to this port here. So we'll slide it in, start the hose, and then we'll twist the manifold into position. And then we'll reconnect all the hoses and electrical connectors from the back onto the ports and brackets. Okay, now that the throttle body hose is reinstalled, we'll take the manifold and we'll lift it up and slide it into place. And then we'll reach around back and we'll install the PCV hose, the brake booster hose, the electrical connector back onto the bracket, and then we'll plug the electrical connector back in. Now we're ready to start rotating the manifold back into position. Okay, now that the manifold's back into place and over the studs, what we're going to do is start the bracket in the back here. I'm not going to put the bolts in just yet. I'm going to leave the manifold loose like this, and then I'll take my bolts, reach around back, and start them, but I'll leave those loose also. I won't tighten them up until we have all the bolts started and torqued down. Now after getting the bracket bolts started, we're going to torque down the front bolts here, and we're going to do it in a pattern. We're going to start in the middle here and go left, right, until all the bolts are tightened down, and we're going to tighten them down to 15 foot-pounds. Now that the manifold's torqued down, you can go ahead and tighten the 2 bolt support bracket bolts in the back. Now we're ready to go ahead and install the vacuum canister, and just bolt the 12mm bolt up and the vacuum switch, and then we're going to plug in the little little holder here that it connected to the vent tube that went from valve cover to valve cover. You just plug that back in there, and then you can go ahead and plug in the electrical connectors after you bolt those two up. Now we're going to come around and plug in the throttle body hose in the front here, and then now we can go ahead and remove our clamps. If you guys didn't have clamps, you can also put bolts on the end of the hoses. That works well too. Now you can go ahead and install the little bracket here that held the purge valve on. Now we can go ahead and change out the throttle body gasket, and here are the part numbers for that. I will link this up in the description also. So once you get that changed out, you can go ahead and just bolt the throttle body back up. After that, you can rebolt up the purge valve and hook the line up to the port here and plug in the electrical connector. Now you can take the air snorkel and put it back in by putting it over the air box in the throttle body, plug in the vent line onto the valve cover, and then now we're ready to start the vehicle up and double check for leaks. If there are no leaks are found, you can go ahead and reinstall your top cover, bolt those up. Then the two front covers you'll install into the snorkel down here towards the bottom of the air boot, rotate it down, start the two clips here. Then we'll put on the little outer corner cover here by putting it in position to start the clips. And that'll complete the job of replacing valve cover gaskets on a Nissan Murano. I'm Brian Essek from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos. Encourage you to subscribe. Invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. And also to remind you that I will link up all the parts and tools that I use in this video. Thank you again for watching.